Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. I'm an employment law business law attorney, and I host this weekly podcast on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I have guests who come on the show and we discuss pressing issues around employment and around business that small and mid-sized companies and entrepreneurs are facing during these challenging times of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that spirit, tonight I'd like to welcome a very interesting guest speaker and guest on the show, Marissa Badgley, MSW, who is the founder of Reloveution. Marissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's great to have you on. I'm glad you're able to have this conversation this evening. And we have an interesting topic for our audience tonight. And I'm going to introduce you in just a moment with more detail. But for now, I'll just say the topic we're going to discuss is a COVID relovution for companies. And that was not a tongue twister. I didn't make a mistake. If they correct, again, a COVID relovution for companies. And what we're discussing is as businesses continue to return their employees to the workplace, it's really vital to have leadership and management that can motivate, support, and uplift their workers, thereby increasing employee happiness and productivity. So the questions become, how can business owners and corporations use compassion and empathy to increase collaboration, to reduce employee turnover, and to build sustainable leadership for the future of their business? So tonight, Marissa and I will be discussing this topic, including a topic of how corporate strategies steeped in business acumen and love can build sustainable leadership models for growth. This is a game-changing show, I believe, and a game changer in this challenging time that is COVID-19, this strange new era. So Marissa, once again, great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I want to say to our guests, or rather our audience tonight, if they're listening, that you are the founder of Reloveution, pardon me, a consulting and professional development services provider that is on a mission to transform workplaces and leadership through the power of compassion, community, and heart. Influenced by Marissa's own journey through burnout and frustration in the workplace, Marissa seeks to teach others how to disrupt destructive cycles authentically, sustainably, and equitably in leadership, in management, and systems to build community and to transform hearts and change the world. Marissa holds a master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis and a bachelor's from Franklin and Marshall College. So again, Marissa, it's really good to have you on the show tonight. And I want to ask you my first question, which is, tell us more about yourself, including how you came to form Reloveution.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks so much for the wonderful introduction and for allowing me to share a little bit more about my story and my journey to this point. So Reloveution was born out of my own experience in toxic workplaces, my own experience with burnout, my own experience ending up in the hospital with heart palpitations because I was working so much and there was no end in sight and I had no support structure. And so I came out of a really successful career and felt like people could have done more for me. Systems could have been more supportive of me. And I had some really good ideas on how to do that. So I launched Reloveution in 2019, right before the world sort of exploded, and have been helping employers better meet the human needs of their employees ever since. And we are committed to helping leaders reach their highest potential and helping workplaces maximize the human potential of their workplaces. Because honestly, there are lots of reasons that people are unhappy in their workplaces. In America, more than 80% of employees are stressed, dissatisfied, burnt out, frustrated in their workplaces, which is where we spend the majority of our time. Most of those things are preventable. And so I help companies of all shapes and sizes prevent those challenges. And if you weren't successful at preventing them, solving them retroactively and really trying to make a difference and build stronger companies.
Yeah, it's interesting, the background there, Marissa. I appreciate you sharing that with all of us. It's what I've noticed over the years is that people that are onto a new innovative idea for a service, for a product, very often in their story, there's a personal connection whereby they experience either the need wasn't met, there was a need for a service or product, maybe they had a certain disability and they found that there was a need for an app that informed them of which restaurants and places in the city had accessible bathrooms and stairways and ramps, or people have questions or issues around a need for a support system that's not there, and so they form that in the form of the shape of a service. So I think it's really good to hear you just talk about your own experience having had burnout and realizing, hey, you worked hard and there wasn't that support. What I also heard, which is interesting, is I heard you say that you help companies either proactively or sort of retroactively, and I could really identify with that. Just as an employment law attorney, we work in similar spaces. I help companies often to comply with the law, and many come to me proactively. How do we set things up to follow the labor laws, payments, and discrimination, so as to avoid lawsuits? And some come though sort of reactively, right? They're being sued. So I imagine you get your fair share of both. And it kind of leads me to a follow-up question for you. Talking about this toxic environment that you faced and you see in companies, I'm wondering, what do you see, Marissa, as some of the main causes out there, main causes that lead to a toxic or a dysfunctional workplace?
Yeah. So there are a lot of them. There are so many reasons why people are unhappy. And I think that that's one of the things that I have to convince employers and leaders of, because we talk about a few at a time and then we sort of bubble in on that. Like, this is what need to address. And humans are different. Humans have core needs, but different humans have different needs. So I hear everything from, I feel unappreciated and undervalued, to my workload is unrealistic. I'm working 90 hours a week. Everything from, I am experiencing bias or discrimination, to I have a terrible manager who has no idea how to manage people, or toxic or ineffective leadership. Some people feel like they're just unfulfilled in their roles. Some people feel like there aren't real opportunities for professional growth, for moving up, for being able to advance skills. Sometimes we hear about unnecessary bureaucracy or interpersonal relationships, like the gossiping at the water cooler type of thing. And people feel like they're gossiping about me, or the people doing the gossiping. And so all of those things come together. And again, almost every one of those things can be solved through strong, proactive, and human-centered approaches. And I sort of lump all of that together in this major category of lack of heart. And so for us at Reloveution, HEART is an acronym. And so when our systems and our leadership and our workplaces lack heart, so that's humanity, empathy, authenticity, relationships, and trust, we are at a severe disadvantage. And so what we do is help diagnose, how is your workplace unto itself, and how are the people within it embodying humanity? How are we embodying empathy and compassion and love? How are we ensuring that people can show up as their most authentic selves without having to wear masks or code switch? How are we ensuring that there are strong relationships so that people not only know people for what they do in a company, but also for who they are and what lights their soul on fire? And then how do we make sure that trust is underlying all of that? And it's not enough to just have trustworthy leaders and trustworthy individual contributors. We also need to have trustworthy systems and infrastructure and culture, and those things wrap around the people. And so, I mean, that's a very long answer. There are a lot of things that lead to toxic and dysfunctional workplaces. My job is to diagnose the root causes of what you're hearing and seeing, or what companies are hearing and seeing, and then helping operationalize sustainable solutions. Not one-off solutions, not solutions that are going to make people feel good for just a week or two, but solutions that will last in the long term, no matter who's in charge, no matter who's working there.
Yeah. It's funny when you said in terms of the answer, I recognize that the question in terms of the causes, even the main causes of a toxic work environment, if you really truly, I think, went into all of them, which I have no doubt you can from your expertise and experience, we'd be here till about 8 o'clock at night. So I'm very mindful of that as well. But what I heard you say with the acronym HEART is that whether it's an issue with gossip, whether it's interpersonal friction, whether it's discrimination or bias, that underlying, like those are the symptoms I'm hearing, and that the root cause is underneath. To go underground, get to the roots. It's a lack of, as you said, humanity, empathy, authenticity, trust, things, integrity, things of that nature. And I think that's really important to really see the root causes. And I think it's a novel approach. I think so often in the workplace, particularly when it comes to employee engagement, employee morale, I think a lot of consultants and service providers will look at like the immediate symptoms. Okay, what's on the surface? How can we pick at these branches? But what about the roots? So
Yeah.
is that something you find as well, that companies come to you and say, okay, here's the problem. And you say to them, well, that's the surface problem. But let me tell you about what's underneath the surface.
Almost every day.
Mm.
And I think I don't blame people because it's the language we're given to use, right? We're told that we need to pay attention to work culture in terms of relationships, team building. We need to focus on leadership. And those are all perfectly good things to focus on. What I really enjoy doing is helping people not only recognize those roots, but also the soil that those roots are growing in, which is our culture, our society. And if the soil is still toxic, you're going to still bear poisonous fruit every time. And so we need to disrupt those roots. And you're right, most of the time people don't know what that means. So a really good example of this is the trust part, right? Leaders come to me all the time and say, people just don't trust each other here. I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? And they say, people just don't trust each other here. And that's not actually the thing, right? And so I've actually been working on this trust diagnostic tool for several years, where we've actually diagnosed or we've actually pulled out these 8 components of trust. And any one of them can go wrong. And we have to know whether or not trust is an issue because people are unreliable. Is trust an issue because there's lack of transparency? Is trust an issue because people are in the wrong seats of the bus? And like they're ineffective at their jobs? Is trust an issue because people aren't credible? They don't actually have the skills that they need. We see that with managers and leaders all the time.
Right.
So and that is an eye opener for people. They go, oh, I never really thought about it that way. We've always just looked at trust as this sort of giant concept that's problematic, but it's way easier to disrupt when you know what the ingredient is that needs disruption. Yeah.
Right. I would imagine so. I mean, imagine might be similar in terms of people saying, well, we have an issue with employee morale. But what does that mean? Well, employee morale is low. Okay, well, low in terms of like not wanting to come to work, low in terms of being fearful around, fearful to take risks, low in terms of not connecting with one another. So it's an interesting, I think, way to look at things.
And I think that very often the standardized normed tools that we use to measure employee engagement and satisfaction actually measure the wrong things, or they don't measure enough of the right things to actually say, this is what we need to work on.
Right. I think, again, I hear more about getting to the root of the problem and the challenges that companies have and business owners have. And I think it's a key thing for any type of service, whether we're like myself as an attorney, I can help clients with the immediate fire to put it out. But if they are storing, to use a metaphor, right, oily rags and kerosene next to each other in all their different rooms, then this problem, right, exactly. And then it'll resurface, right? We'll put the fire out. There'll be a new lawsuit over alleged discrimination or vagueness around contracts that get breached and disputes. So I think it's real. I'm hearing also talk with like specificity, right, in terms of how you approach. And believe it or not, speaking of approaches, we're approaching our first commercial break. So we need to take that break in just a moment. Folks, you're listening to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauber. My guest tonight is Marissa Badgley, founder of Reloveution. When we come back, we're going to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic may have intensified problems, created new problems as well, and what we can do about that. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
You a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show, A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Did you know that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. battles mental illness? Hi, my name is Albert Dabo. I'm the host of the show Extra Innings. Extra Innings, I discuss the topics of wellness, mental health, and the experience of surviving multiple suicides within my family. Listen live every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern to Extra Innings for discussions with sports figures, artists, mental health professionals, many others. That's Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. And I'm your host, Eric Sauver, here tonight with my guest, Marissa Badgley, MSW, and founder of Reloveution. Getting the name accurate, correct there. And yet it is a bit of a revolutionary approach, I believe, in terms of incorporating love and compassion, empathy, and heart over productivity. I think a lot of people out there who provide services to companies, very much the draw is, okay, these are the metrics. We're going to, triple your sales. We're going to reduce employee dissatisfaction or employee turnover by 30%. And I'm sure I'm not sure. I would imagine that those objective metrics and measures are things that perhaps your clients might aspire to. But would I be correct that they also you're teaching them about the guiding principles on how to manage and such?
Yeah, so I think what I like to I don't like to say that we're valuing empathy, humanity, heart, any of those things over productivity. We believe that by creating organizations and leaders that are grounded in heart, that maximizes our productivity every time. I also think that one of the things I hear a lot of is like we're over there singing Kumbaya around the coffee machine, like it's all very woo-woo, like love, compassion, empathy. There's no place for that in business. And I think it's the only way that we can do business in this era, in any era. And I honestly believe that if you are creating a system that has empathy and compassion and no accountability, it's going to yield chaos, right? I am all for strong systems, strong productivity measures, strong accountability systems. And I believe that one of the greatest ways that we can show love, one of the greatest ways we can be compassionate is by giving radical feedback, by holding people accountable and making sure that those systems are in place to be able to hold people to the highest bar and higher standard. We don't have to yell at them. We don't have to use fear and scarcity as tactics. We don't need to prioritize competition. So all of the things that I teach are the baseline for the things that you and other companies care about most. And I really, really believe in that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because earlier on tonight, we were discussing different challenges companies face and your approaches. I was thinking to myself, I hear a both and solution and not an either or solution. I think too often in our, especially in business, right? People sort of say, do I go this route or that route? So here, some might say, oh, I think we should have love and compassion and empathy instead of focusing on productivity. And others say, no, I think we should focus on productivity instead of focusing on heart and passion. So I'm glad you brought up the sort of the marrying of those two, because there really is not only room for both, but they both kind of do connect, and they create. I think also they feed each other, right? I think if you've got the baseline and the principles in place, it leads to productivity. And I think productivity and positive markers reinforce for the employees and the employers, hey, this works. Let's try this approach. Just keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. It brings me to another question for you, Marissa. You mentioned about especially in this era, and of course, we're very much in the COVID-19 era. I wouldn't even say post-COVID because it's not fully over, but we're in a different phase of it, right? There was the shutting down phase, and all that entailed that. If we turn the clock back 13, 14 months ago, even a year ago, then there was sort of the adjusting to this new way phase. Then there's sort of the glimmer of hope, and then the vaccine and people coming back. So I wanted to talk about COVID-19. And I'm wondering, do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified existing problems between companies and their employees? Maybe I shouldn't say or, and, right, because it's both and.
Yeah.
Has it created new types of dysfunction and toxicity in the workplace?
So I think that there have been some companies that have done really, really well. And I think that there are some companies that haven't done so well at all. And I think that there are some companies that have done really well during this period that are at risk of not doing so well as we move into this next reopening phase. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So when everything shut down last March, there was like a compassion revolution, right? We heard from leaders was that we need to be deeply empathetic. Like, people are experiencing profound loss, especially in New York, where you and I are. There was so much loss, so much trauma, so much chaos around us. And people shifted really quickly into like these human-centered mindsets of, we need to take care of our people. We need to make sure that families are safe. And that was the right thing to do. And we should have been doing it all along. We need to make sure that our employees are taken care of, not only in times of crisis, but also in times of normalcy and calm. And that allows us to start from a better place when conflict does arise, when challenges do arise, right? If employees feel like they're valued, like they're appreciated, then it makes a difference. So what's interesting right now is that we're moving back into business as usual, whatever the heck that means in June 2021, right? We're aspiring to go back to normal. And what's risky here is that normal wasn't good for most employees, right? I started the beginning by saying that 80% of employees are unhappy in their work environments. So we weren't doing great before the pandemic.
No.
Those numbers might have actually ticked up for some companies during the pandemic, because there was this radical new approach of, we're taking care of our people, we're providing childcare subsidies, we're doing all of these extra innovative things. And now what I'm seeing is that companies are starting to pull back on those things. Like, we're going back to business as usual. We're not going to have as many leniencies. We're not going to be as flexible. You have to choose whether you're going to work from home or be in an office. And you have to make that decision right now, so that we know when we open in September, like what's going on. And so it sort of feels like in some places, everything that we learned is starting to go by the wayside. And so I'm here to remind you, like, what you do right now really, really matters. And I think there's been a lot of writing in the last couple of weeks. I don't know how I feel about the name, but people are deeming it the Great Resignation. And it's this idea that people are going to be resigning at really high rates coming into the summer or out of the summer, because things have stabilized. They've recognized that there's another way they can have work-life balance. And so I think that I think I'll get more to that after in another question. But what we have the opportunity to do now, if that one of our values is authenticity. And so the decisions that companies are making at this moment are going to validate that company's authenticity metric, whether that company can be trusted. Because if you revert to business as usual, everything you've done for the last year goes null and void. It doesn't matter anymore. But if we actually learn from this year and recognize how much people have gone through and start from there and reinvent a new business as usual, there's tremendous power there. So I think that's one piece. Within that, I've seen both sides of the coin. I think that for the first 6 months of the pandemic, there was a blurring of work-life balance that was extraordinarily disruptive for many of us. It was like back-to-back Zooms. I'm never off. My boss thinks that they can call me at 9 p.m. because where else would I be? I'm just sitting at my computer.
I movie, so
yeah, I think that some of the intensity of that has decreased, but I do think that there are some people and some companies that were more productive than they've ever been because of unrealistic expectations. And so like that's something to be aware of. The flip side of that is that I've also talked to leaders who have had work-life balance for the first time in 20 years. They are getting to spend time with their children, with their wives, with their husbands, with their partners. And they're like, wait, I actually really like these people. I want to see my kid grow up. And by going back to this place or going back to the office where I might have an hour and a half commute, I'm going to lose like bedtime with my kids. And employers are going to have to be ready to hear that. Like people's values have shifted, as with any trauma. Like we just went through a collective trauma. People's values have shifted, and we have to be responsive to that. I think that the last piece here is that one of the big things that has been totally exacerbated during this time is that you cannot recreate in-person connection virtually. You just can't. And there are some people out there that will tell you that you can, but there is something different about being able to manifest serendipity. You bump into somebody in an elevator, which spurs a conversation. You grab a coffee or you go out for a walk. That sparks new conversations. It sparks innovations. And there's actually a lot of research that shows that people are more innovative even if they're not talking to each other, just by being in the same room as other people. And we need innovation, we need creativity. And so while technology is incredibly helpful, and thank goodness we had it this past year, I really believe that we need those organic relationship moments, the opportunity for human beings to feel each other's energy and understand each other. Is really a challenge, because I think most companies are moving towards hybrid models where some people are working from home, some people are working from another country, some people are working in the office, and that's okay. But I've been telling people, you have to add into your budget, into your strategic plan for the year, at least quarterly in-person gatherings or events. Just because we need it. We're human creatures. We're social creatures.
Marissa, there is some real gold, I believe, to unpack there. You've said things I think, like, I appreciate hearing, because I can see it with my clients, but also I can see my own personal evolution through some of these milestones you were talking about, including the work-life balance, which I've always valued, the time with my wife and son, my young family, but certainly seeing the and that actually is interesting to unpack right there. But it is time for a commercial break. So rather than, I'll get into that after the break with you, when I unpack what you said. So folks, Eric Sauver here with my guest, Marissa Badgley from Reloveution here on Talk Radio NYC, Employment Law Today. When we come back, we're going to unpack some of the gold that Marissa just shared with us and talk about looking ahead as we return to the workplace. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Wise Content Creates Wealth. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Friday afternoon from 1 p.m. to 2. They say content is king. Well, wise content rules the world. Every episode features tools and tips for content marketing and business people telling the wise content stories of that success. Tune in every Friday from 1 p.m. to 2 on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. Here tonight, folks, with Marissa Badgley, founder of Reloveution, which is seeking to transform businesses and how management basically does what they do and leads people and increases employee morale and connectivity. Really a lot that you said there, Marissa. I just wanted to unpack a few things before that you spoke about before the commercial break. And in terms of how I see it applying in our today, and for our audience to kind of take in, this idea that people, like, we tend to get very sort of this this flood of a compassion when something very horrific happens or tragic or like a collective trauma or individual trauma. And to your point, the first question, why not be that way, right, all the time? Like, why do we need a global pandemic or, a terrorist attack or some horrible thing to rally people to say, hey, you're my equal, you're my brother, sister, so to speak. And then the idea that, when people are wanting to return to business as usual, I've seen a phenomenon with some of my clients because I work with employers where it's like, they don't say this in their language, but the subtext that I hear, maybe you hear it too, is, okay, we were very generous, we were compassionate, we set you up, we took care of you, we understood about your kids having, school Zoom at home, and enough is enough. Okay, now it's time to get to be tough and to and I wonder, do you see that? And if you do, what flawed model do you see that coming from? Like, what element of heart might be missing? Those sort of to get over it, or okay, now it's time to
all of them.
It's H.E.A.R.T, right?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to our previous conversation about the symptoms, right?
Right.
So when an employer says COVID-19 was the problem, or the pandemic was the problem, and we solved for that, now that is over. That was part of the problem. That was the problem that was most up in our faces.
Yeah.
It was not the problem that employees have been experiencing in their workplace day to day, every day, when they've been coming into work, right? All the things that we talked about. If there's low morale, if there's low trust, if people did not trust their leadership before the pandemic, there's not very little that you can do during crisis to reverse that. And so I think that there's a lot of, all right, we did our thing, we got through this, now pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move on. That's problematic because of what I just said, but it's also problematic like on a very biological perspective. And so one of the other things that's important to recognize as an employer is that the last 15 months or so have been a time of profound loss. They have been a time of profound human suffering. I know a number of people who have lost multiple family members to the pandemic. And if not to the disease itself, potentially weren't able to grieve the loss of loved ones. This has been a season of loss in so many ways. People have lost their independence. People have lost potentially their financial security. People have, in some cases, lost their homes or their housing. People lost a sense of safety for over a year, right? And loss is a type of trauma that impacts our brains in really, really profound ways. And we can't just turn that off because we're all vaccinated. So we've gone through this prolonged period of trauma that has fundamentally changed who we are as people. Our brains are different now. And so employers can't expect for the same people to show back up in their workplaces, the same people from March 2020. Right. These are different humans with different lived experiences coming in, and we can't just get rid of that because it's convenient. We're not through the pandemic yet. And even if we do get through it, the next phase is about healing, right? It's about how do we heal collectively from this intense trauma that we've all experienced together. People are experiencing higher levels of mental health crisis than ever before, which means that there's a need for more accommodations in workplaces. And people are going to be requesting them at higher rates. And we can't just gaslight them and say, this isn't actually a thing. Like increased anxiety and mental health disorders are like actually a thing that are happening. And we need to be ready as companies, as employers, to respond to that with compassion. Which is not the same thing as sympathy. And a lot of people are really good at sympathy and saying, there, this was hard. Here's a card because your grandma died from COVID, right? Now is a time for radical compassion that is accompanied by action that shows people that you actually care in the long term. And that is what heals the parts of our brains that have been damaged. True care, true love, true support and relationships.
That, I think, is a great segue into my other question for you, my final question, before we talk a little bit more about your company and some events you might be having. But looking ahead, like, let's talk about this, where we've gone through this collective trauma, as you pointed out, and we're still, I dare say, going through it as well. I think when we're in a traumatic situation, right, we get into that sort of like lockdown or fight or flight or freeze mode, as we tend to say. But what now in terms of the healing? Pardon me. So the question becomes, looking ahead as we return to in-person or hybrid offices, workplaces, how would Reloveution help companies and businesses to repair, right, or improve their company's internal leadership and morale? Like, what concrete steps would you advise our listeners tonight to take for this compassion practice?
Yeah, so I would say that whether you decide to reach out to me or not, it's really, really important to diagnose what's actually happening, not to make assumptions about what's happening for your people, your employees, their families, their communities. Like, we actually need to ask the hard questions and measure, quantifiably measure, not like mushy gushy stuff, not like measure what is happening for the human beings that are working with us. So I would say that taking that time to actually diagnose the issue is important. The second step there is that once you have a diagnosis, you need to have a holistic intervention process. So at Reloveution, we focus on 4 major levels, and we believe that you have to create an intervention or a portion of the intervention at every one of these levels in order to see real change. So a lot of times, and I'll share them in those 4 levels in a second, but a lot of times employers will focus on 1 or 2 of them and then wonder why they're not getting results. And the reason is because I believe that you have to do all of them. So the first is the individual contributor level. So ensuring that every human being that works, whether they're a leader or not, has the skills, knowledge, expertise, and resources to do their job well. And some of that is the soft stuff, and some of that is hard skills stuff. The second piece, the second domain, is around leadership and management, which we so often fall short on. So making sure that leaders and managers have the skills, knowledge, expertise, and resources to lead and manage well. And so making sure that there's a program in place for that development. That's something that I do. It's something that a lot of people do. I advocate for that being done internally with managers rather than sending to an external training, because you want managers that are learning according to your values and your culture. Which brings us to the third component. The third domain is culture and community. So ensuring that every workplace, every company has common mission, vision, values, not just beautifully written on a website, but also like in action, that employees understand the North Star, how their role contributes to that North Star. And then the fourth domain is systems, policies, procedures. How do we ensure that those are also human-centered? How do we make sure that our hiring processes, our interviewing processes, our accountability processes, our performance review processes, all of those also need to embody heart, right? So we intervene at all 4 of those levels, and all 4 are really, really important. I think that if I were to say 2 things really quickly that people could do, like invest in today, I think that one is making sure that there is a system in place to know that, have your humans know that there are people that care about them for real. And so that goes to appreciation, gratitude, showing value. And I think that making sure that there is a growth development plan for every person at this particular moment in time is going to help prevent that great resignation or whatever's happening. Because if people have something they're aspiring to, they're less likely to leave. If they believe that a promotion is coming or a growth opportunity is coming, they will likely stay. So at this particular moment, because retention's on everybody's minds, that's what we need to be focused on. And it needs to be authentic. It needs to be real. And that's what I do. I help design those interventions, which is super cool.
I mean, for sure, I think I agree with you. It has to be authentic. And there are people, I think, who, if you're motivated by the genuine desire to have a better, happier workplace that's more serene and more compassionate, that's, I think, like the North Star of our moral compass. But also, I think, if let's say some of our audience listening tonight or listening in the future, maybe they're not quite there yet, but they're working towards that goal, that North Star. Nice to know that, there are other positive ramifications for implementing, the H.E.A.R.T, if you will, acronym and these principles. I know that as an employment lawyer, that often companies ask me, this person has an accommodation request. What does the law say I have to do or don't have to do? What's my obligation? And there's a law. Pardon me. There's like the floor, and there's the ceiling, and there's the bare minimum. But it's been my experience practicing employment law these years that when a company is just doing the bare minimum for their employees, employees know that. And if you have disgruntled employees and there is a conflict and there's a ground for them to possibly sue, they're more likely to go to that place than if they feel supported that, okay, there's a conflict, but you're generally trying to work it out. And I've seen that with employees suing for discrimination, employees suing for toxic workplace or wrongful termination. So really good. It's like, hey, there are motivations here. You want to reduce your risk of liability, increase your profit, and also do the right thing. So we're on a next commercial break. And when we come back, we'll just talk about some of these issues in more detail. You're listening to Employment Law Today. My guest tonight, Marissa Badgley from Reloveution on Talk Radio NYC. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Howdy, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back, folks, to Employment Law Today. I'm here tonight with my guest, Marissa Badgley. I'm Eric Sauver, host of the show. And we're talking about this COVID reloveution, really a revolution of sorts for companies, talking about corporate strategies that are steeped in business acumen, but also steeped in love and compassion as a way to provide sustainable leadership and growth. And really a lot there, I think, for people to take away from this talk tonight. The things that I got from what you shared with our audience, I hear, right, the importance of a holistic approach of looking at the whole picture and not just picking and choosing, not just cherry picking. Well, we're all about culture and connection, but let's not really go into diversity and bias too much, or, that's not a problem for us. Or getting past the idea that we can be compassionate during a crisis, and then when that crisis is starting to abate, that we can suddenly say, all right, well, let's get back to business as usual. And then lastly, your point about, I think that if there's any silver lining from this this year, 15 months of difficult, as you mentioned, just trauma for us as a world, frankly, as a globe, right? Is that I think some people would are able to take stock. They're able to take stock and reassess what's important to them. And if you run a business, you may have taken that stock for yourself, but I think you can be sure that at least some of your employees have done some of that soul searching, maybe all of them to some degree. So it's important, I hear, to listen to your employees, right? To value their human needs and not just their need for a paycheck. And that's what I took away from And I took away also that you, through Reloveution, help businesses to get to a place where there's harmony and productivity. Is that kind of like what the gist of what you were saying?
Yeah, really good summary. I call it holistic harmony. And I think it needs to be inclusive of everything that we do, from the micro decisions we make on a daily basis to the really, really big decisions. I've been talking to a lot of startups these days about how so some startups did really, really well during the pandemic, and recently spoke to a startup that started with 4 employees in March 2020, and they're now more than 60 employees worldwide, and none of them have ever met each other. Like that, that makes a huge difference. And I've also been talking to teams about mergers and acquisitions. So how do you do this well when you have 2 cultures that you're trying to bring together? How do you meet the human needs of people who are scared and uncertain, and like these moments of that are traditionally really, really scary and sort of volatile situations for human beings. And so I feel like one of my favorite parts of my job is that humanity is the common element to everything that we do. Right. And it is the through line. You're a human, I'm a human. Every employee, except for maybe some service dogs, are like, they are human beings, and we all have these core human needs, which are to be loved, which are to belong, to feel like we can be successful in the world, to feel like we can do the things that we were put on this earth to do, and to feel safe while doing it. And that's not just physical safety, which we've paid a lot of attention to this past year. It's also really emotional safety and psychological safety, ensuring that we are taking care of each other and seeing each other and truly hearing each other. And there are so many things that I can do, that we can do together to help start really operationalizing and systematizing on some of those traditionally more subjective human experiences.
Right. And it definitely does come down to systems, and what you said a moment ago about, there are micro decisions and there are major ones. And I think often what we say and do in the micro is just as important and revealing and revelatory as our major decisions. Whether you're owning a business and you're having policies for your employees or for yourself or your customers as well. It's interesting too. I think that having consistent messages is so key. I was reading an article recently, and it really struck me that company that tried a 5-hour workday as an experiment. And the thing that struck me was not so much the 5-hour part, but that the company, and this is from the article, so it's not anything that's, it's all facts. They admit this, they confirm this. The CEO and head basically said, we're going to have an 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. day, so we can give you your life back. You can have the afternoons free, time with family. And they said, but we're going to expect you to do all the work you did before and more, or you're fired. So I'm putting pressure on you and giving you a gift. And to me, that sends a mixed signal. Well, okay, wait, you value me and my time, but I'm fired if I can't figure this out in 5 hours after an 8-hour day. So I think they tried this pre-pandemic, and then they found that it didn't quite. There were breakdowns in culture and communication. So I think I mentioned that because I read that and I thought, oh, I'll have Marissa on the show tomorrow. Wonder her thoughts about that. But I feel like you, and unfortunately we have a few minutes left, but you covered the need for authenticity and consistency in messaging. And I think that in my mind that's kind of a weird like a disconnect there. It's have some free time and you're fired.
And that's exactly why we believe that it's important to do intervention on all 4 levels to make sure that those things are in sync. Because so often a really good leader will say, of course, you just lost somebody, take all the time you need. But guess what? The human resources person didn't get that memo, and the company policy doesn't match with the take all you need compassionate approach.
Right.
We have to reconcile those differences. We have to have those deep and uncomfortable conversations about what do you truly stand for? And if you really stand for your people, then let's figure out how to do that. How do we help you take care of your people sustainably?
Yeah, very, I think really good points to make, Marissa. And we are coming to the end of our show. We have about 2.5 minutes left. So I want to give you a couple minutes to share with people, like, how can they contact you? And if you have any interesting events coming up or promotions or webinars, the floor is yours.
Sure. So again, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
I am just really excited to talk to you and let you know that I exist here. I offer an alternative approach to consulting and professional development. I am looking to connect with leaders and decision makers who have tried the traditional approaches and their people are still unhappy. They're frustrated because that you might have spent a whole lot of money on a consultant and your problems still aren't solved. Why would this consultant, we did this work 2 years ago, why are we still talking about these things? So we offer a suite of services. So we talked about H.E.A.R.T. We have a H.E.A.R.T audit to help you really diagnose the challenges that you're experiencing in your workplaces. That pushes out a report card with recommendations, and then we'll help you through like implementing the solutions. We also do a ton of training and professional development, both one-off and also programs. So we talked about leadership and management development. We have a new manager development program called Reloveutionary Leaders, and we implement that in-house with your team over a period of time to really support them building the skills and philosophy and mindsets needed to do their jobs well. And I do consulting and professional development for companies, but I also work with individuals. So sometimes a leader will come to me and say, I just need a 60-minute strategy session. So if you're listening and you feel like you could benefit from a conversation about your work culture, your employee engagement challenges, we can dig into our framework together. And there are always light bulbs. You will walk away with great ideas. Right now, we are recruiting for our nonprofit culture cohort. We will have a startup culture cohort starting in the fall. So if anything that you've heard today has resonated with you and you are associated with a nonprofit, this is a 6-month experience designed to help nonprofits build the culture of their dreams.
I'm so sorry. I
know we're out of time.
Coming up, but thank you. That was wonderful. Great discussion tonight, folks. I'm Eric Sauver. Again, apologies for that intro, but we're host of Employment Law Today. Tune in Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. for interesting guests and topics. Marissa Badgley, folks from Reloveution, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.